Okay. Hi. My name's Stephen Ford. I'm the manager of engagement for the Allied Arts Council of Lethbridge, and I am not in Lethbridge at the moment. Um, and we normally start this with the land acknowledgement, and I still will, that most of you are gathered on Treaty 7 territory, lands of the Blackfoot people. I am not. I am in Sicamous right now on a sort of mini vacation, but still participating, obviously, in the artwork session. And something I learned in doing so is that I didn't know that in Sicamous there is no treaty for this area. So something that I do kind of mention when I bring up land acknowledgements is it's important that they're not just about words, right? Words are one thing, but it's in the grander scheme of what reconciliation is and should be, it needs to be more than words. And clearly, me not realizing that I'm not on treaty lands is a point of ignorance that I need to correct. So I am going to resolve to fix that and learn more about uh, just learn more about this. So anyone who has not been to one of these sessions before, this is artwork, sort of the branded session for artist development that we do with the Allied Arts Council. So various topics and just sort of developing your craft within the art world. And today we have our very special guest that we have is Ose, make sure I pronounce the name correctly, Irete, who is a reporter and photojournalist with over a decade of experience. He has an undergrad in anthropology from the U of L and a visual journalism grad diploma from Concordia in Montreal. And sort of what we're talking about today, I'll let Ose kind of really explain it, but just in a nutshell, we're talking about the sort of the connection between arts and media. So without any further ado, I will pass it on to Ose and let him do his presentation. And thank you so much, Ose, for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you to everyone who is joining us. My name is Ose Irete. I guess Stephen now would be the time to start the presentation sharing. But yeah, I wear several hats. Some of you may know me as for via my day job, which is our work as a journalist for the CBC. Um, but yeah, I do a lot of different things. I am a photographer primarily. Okay, here we go. Here's the presentation. Um, yeah, so if you could just click over to the next slide. So I get called the CBC guy a lot, which is funny. But I'm like, that's my job. I'm not the CBC guy. But I guess this is a little smorgasbord, a little tasting of who I am. Top left, I was born in Nigeria. This Nigerian flag with green, white, green. Lived there for about half my life. At the bottom ish, there's a Dutch flag. I lived in the Netherlands for a little bit. And on the right ish bottom, there is the Welcome to Fort McMurray sign, which has changed now. It's not as fun anymore. That old one used to say, "We've got the energy." But that's the first place I moved to in Canada before moving to Lethbridge to attend the University of Lethbridge, where I got an undergrad in anthropology. Um, then yeah, some of my favorite things. I'm a photographer primarily. That's like the thing that I love. And the first job I had with the CBC was as a photojournalist, but do lots of other stuff now. And that's still the thing that I like. I always have a camera on me pretty much, and I'm always taking pictures. The rest is just some things I love. Far left, I love green. That's my favorite color, at least at the moment. Specifically, these shades of green. Very enjoyable. Not like a highlighter. I like a sage or a forest green. I like to read a lot, so my favorite book is The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, who is my favorite author. If you haven't read any of her books, you should. They're very good. I like cooking. On the right, it's my favorite knife shape, which is a santoku knife. I like a rocking tip knife. And I love candy. I eat a lot of candy. And currently I'm running through packs of Haribo Star Mix, the UK kind or the European kind, because the North American one doesn't have the eggs in it, which is really sad. I did my post grad in visual journalism at Concordia University. Um, that Man in a Robe is a rapper named Hef. It was the album Heffermocha, which is one of my favorite albums ever. And next to the University of Lethbridge logo is the state flag of New Mexico, which I've never lived in New Mexico. I've never been to New Mexico, but I love flags, and that is one of my favorite flags. I think that might be my favorite flag ever. So yeah, and also I'm a big soccer fan, and I love Arsenal. That's my favorite team. So at least if you didn't know anything about me besides being the CBC guy, now you know a few more things. So hopefully that is helpful. But if we switch over to the next slide, yeah. So like I said, a lot of the work that the main work that I was doing for the CBC, first of all, was photography. Um, and yeah, a lot of that is photojournalism. So I was going out and photographing events, photographing protests, taking portraits of people for um, to accompany stories that were going out, and that was super fun. Like I felt like I was stealing a living because I'm getting paid to take pictures. This is hilarious. I would be doing this anyways, but a lot of the work like that, I think that work represents maybe about 5% of my photography. I tend to Most of the photos I've taken or I take are photos of people around me, photos of my friends, photos of my family, photos of just stuff I see. Like I said, I pretty much always have a camera on me. And even if it's not like a camera in that sense, thanks to the beauties of modern technology, we have these. And I always have pretty much always have my phone on me. So I'm always taking pictures. And I'm really interested in personal storytelling. Which is, I think we can switch to the next slide. And I want to talk about this a bit today because I think when we think about like if you're an artist and you're thinking about media, um, often it's through the lens of like branding. So you got to brand yourself, you got to have a brand. What is your brand? How do you how are you kind of selling yourself, which feels very horrible to say, but how are you putting yourself forward? And I will tell you, I am personally very bad at it, especially when it comes to social media and using social media to kind of promote myself or promote my work. I Besides photography, I do lots of other things. Like I have an art practice that's kind of hibernating right now because I'm incredibly busy. But I've done a lot of like sound work, experimental video stuff. I make music. I've done some performance stuff. So like I every now and then I'll rip out a comedy set. I'm a dabbler, I like to dabble in a thing or two, but all of these things, I find it quite hard to distill into like, oh, this is my brand. And even when I've tried to pick pick and show kind of where what I'm doing, I kind of struggle. I see a question from Sterling says, what's my sorting and organization process for all the photos that I take? Just folders. I've gotten better at labeling, so I try to label everything with like a name, file name, date. So every file has that. But I have several hard drives. I have boxes with prints in it. And just yeah, it's kind of all over the place. I need to do better. But what someone actually once told me was that most photographers are quite unorganized with their photography. It's usually archivists that sort it out afterwards. So that made me feel a lot better. But yeah, that's kind of my process. But yeah, a lot of it is just that personal storytelling. And because so many of the photos I take are tied to my personal life, I've had to learn how it's kind of an exploration of me telling my own story constantly. And so I'm going to share some of the stuff that I've dealt with or gone through, or some of the things that have happened with me um, as a journalist, but also as an artist, and how those things intersect with maybe some of the lessons and takeaways that I hope you guys take away from today. But to start, I guess I could tell you about like my journey into media felt incredibly convoluted. It was like looking at point B and being at point A, looking at point B, but instead of going directly, doing the whole I worked as a youth worker. I was kind of chasing um, all over the place, but yeah, it was really kind of convoluted, and a lot of what I do is driven by interest. And so, like I said, trying to distill that into a brand or even like a general direction is quite hard. So I was always just like, just keep doing, and then hopefully something will come of it. But if you go on to the next slide, yeah, okay. Just some examples. So this is more of the photos I take just in my life. Like these three photos were all taken on my phone, just kind of casually. This on the far left is just a photo of my roommate from when I was towards the end of university. He was playing FIFA, I think, on the PS4, and in the middle is my friend Maggie, also from around university, and she just had a pack of cigarettes. And I found it funny because she would get people to bring her Newports from the States because she's from the UK, and so she smoked menthol cigarettes. And this is to the right is my friend Sam, and we were just at a lake, and he was sitting down. The light looked good. I said, "Just keep sitting," and I took a quick picture on my phone. So yeah, a lot of that personal storytelling. But when I was at this time taking these photos, the only real way I knew how to share them was via social media, right? So it was via Instagram. And I used to get really frustrated because I felt like um, my work wasn't going where I wanted it to go or getting the kind of reception I wanted it to get, you know. So I would post these pictures and be like, this is the coolest thing that I've ever done. And it would get like 28 likes. And I feel bad, but I had a bit of a hatery streak in me, and I would get really upset because I would see people who posted like what I felt like was an incredibly basic picture of like a forest. And I love landscape photography, I should clarify, but I felt very like this, why is my stuff not um connecting? Like why am I not getting the same kind of traction that other people are getting? Um, and I think what I realized eventually was that maybe it just wasn't for me. And by it, I mean trying to brand myself in a particular way. And so that is kind of the crux of what I want to talk about today is like when you're thinking about working with media, or if you're an artist and you're thinking about getting your stuff out there, you're trying to, maybe um, you're having an exhibition or an opening and you want media coverage, or you're trying to get people there. It's really about thinking about like what it is you're actually trying to achieve, as opposed to what you think a measure of success is. And so it feels very woo woo and not like hard tips. I have a bunch of tips that I will give at the end, but I think a lot of it comes down to, first of all, a knowledge of self, and a knowledge of self in terms of you as a person, but also a knowledge of yourself in terms of your practice, what it is you're doing in art. If you, so for me, I was trying very hard to get these photos to get traction on social media. And eventually what I realized was the things I admired most and enjoyed most in photography are actually physical products. Um, so photo books, prints, those were the things that really caught my eye. Um, I always, I've always kind of sucked at photo shoots because it felt like an incredible amount of pressure, and that's Even thinking about money in photography, that's where I felt like a lot of people were making money. So I tried doing photo shoots and I would feel incredibly awkward. People would be like, can you pose me? And I'm like, I don't really know. Could you just vibe? And they're like, well, I need some direction. And now I feel under pressure and my hand is shaking behind the camera. But learning that, okay, maybe that's just not for what I actually enjoy doing or what I want to do. And deciding to kind of pivot a little bit and say, okay, I'm going to do something else. And so if you go to the next slide, I think there's more photos. But yeah, these are just some more photos I have taken of my friends just around hanging out. And these are the photos I enjoy the most and are most dear to me. And I think actually encapsulate more so of like who I am as a photographer. And then the next slide. Yeah, so that knowledge of self, of like why do you do what you do, and what is actually important to you? Like what is your measure of success as opposed to like what maybe you know you feel like is other people say is a measure of success, right? What you want to show. And I know there's also like a practical thing of like money, which is very, very real, of wanting to maybe make a profit or make a living from the work that you're doing. But figuring out how to kind of align that with a direction that makes sense for you. So on the right is a photo zine that I made. It's just like a little photo book, self-published. And I made this around the time where I was like, you know what? I really don't like having to put 10 hashtags at the bottom of my photo to maybe get like 10 extra likes and, not really feel like it's going the places that I want it to go. And so I was fun employed, and this was in the kind of early lockdown days of the pandemic. And I decided to like learn how to use InDesign and made this photo book with some of the photos from my phone that I showed earlier in it. And in doing that, like I was able to make some money off of it. I think I sold around 100 copies of it, about $20 a pop. I was fun employed, like I said, so that was way more money than I was making, anyways, which is zero. And from there, I had that skill, and I realized, okay, this is the thing I want, and this is the thing I enjoy doing. And so, as a group, when I was back in Lethbridge. So at the time I made the photo book, I was in Calgary, and I moved back to Lethbridge. And my friends and I were talking about, something that we've been talking about for ages, which is, doing something as Black people in Lethbridge and putting something together. We'd wanted to do gallery shows, and we talked about it for years. And then because it was, during lockdowns, we couldn't necessarily have an event. So what we decided to do was make a zine, just like a little magazine with Black creatives called We're Here Too. And so we sourced, we asked for submissions. We were able to get some funding through LPERG, to cover costs and pay people a little bit. And I think this is where it gets into some of the stuff that I want to talk about with your relationship to media as an artist. So the first thing is you got to do something. Like a thing has to be done. So I think, and I encounter this a lot as a journalist, where people may have, maybe more so with business, but people may have a business or something, and they're like, oh, cover my business. Well, it's like, can't just cover your business. Like, I can't just do a story on, like, something has to happen, right? Is there an event? Is there an interesting product? Is there an issue? Like, there has to be something going on. Like, that's the first step. All you can do is the work. So to paint the picture, this is February 2021, and I was as far away from media as I felt incredibly far away from any kind of media job. I'd finished my grad program, which was in visual journalism. I was trying to get work. I couldn't. I didn't. And so we just were all we were really doing was posting about this zine that we were making, and we ended up selling it at Analog Books here in town. And so we had a little like, hey, this is the day that we're going to kind of launch, and then sales will be on for the rest of, what, as long as quantities last. We had no real connection to media, right? Like and we didn't even send out press releases or whatever, but I think just through kind of our posts and maybe our networks of people sharing stuff, someone from, I believe it was CTV, got wind of this, and so they sent us a message and said, hey, we would like to interview you. And was like, yeah, for sure, we'll do an interview. From the CTV piece that ran, I think it was CTV Lethbridge, and then someone from Calgary at the CBC caught wind. So it's funny, my first real interaction with the CBC was actually as a guest when I was interviewed for the Eye Opener, which is the morning show about this zine. And so I wanted to tell that story because there wasn't much more that we did than do the work. There's a bunch of factors that I'm now, being in media, I can tell factored into like us getting this story running and people thinking it was interesting, but all we really did was just the thing, which is like the most important part of everything, I think. But there's also a few other things. So although personally it is a gripe I have, and I talk to the higher ups about this all the time, but we put this zine out in February, which is Black History Month, and we were a group of Black creatives doing this. That is a tie-in for media, right? So if as much as I would like, Black people to be included in everyday coverage of news, there is a thing where in February everybody is frothing at the mouth for Black people. They're like, we've realized Black people exist, and now we need to put them on the news. And so having our project come out at this time meant that there was like a big tie-in. We were also really, really big talking about joy. Like the zine was full of photos of joy of just Black people around Lethbridge. So the tag was Lethbridge through the eyes of its Black creatives. And so it was just people, sharing their everyday lives, which is something that isn't really seen when it comes to Black History Month, because often a lot of the narratives and all the stories involve trauma and pain and sadness. And so having this was a different angle. And if we go to the next slide, and this is just a question of like, who would you like to know about what you're doing? Like, who would you like to know about it? And I think that's a good place to work backward from if you're thinking about media, right? Like, so when I was making my personal little like photo book that I was selling, I was making it with people like me in mind who enjoy physical products, who want to have a small coffee table book, or people who also like people who buy local art, right? And so, that was just something I did through a lot of like social media sales. Like I just posted it and was trying to share it and stuff. But I would think about now, like, okay, who would I like to know about it? People who, purchase art, those kinds of things. Where do those people go? Where are those people? And I think often, and I know this talk is about media, but often that looks like social media, or even like media, like the radio, TV, but it's also physical space. It's also community, and that's another thing to think about when you're talking about like personal storytelling versus branding. I know this about myself. Part of my personal story is I'm a guy that knows people. This is before I was a journalist. I talk to random people all the time. I do a lot of random stuff. So I'm the guy that knows a guy. So like that's a thing I know about myself that I'm able to leverage when it comes to me like doing anything, right? I feel like I have a big enough network that I'm like two people removed from anywhere that maybe I need something to go. There are people who may not have a big social media presence, but you are present in particular parts of your community, right? If you are a member of maybe a religious community, or you play a sport and you're really active in that community, like those are all things that are part of your personal story. And as creative people, you can get creative about how you use that. And I don't like using the word leverage because it feels very feels like I'm doing CEO speak, but how you leverage that to help you and to kind of like share your stuff. And then if we go to the next slide, um, yeah, so beyond like all the frou-frou stuff, like know yourself, know your practice, know where you want it to go. There's also some practical tips, and I have some written up here, and there probably will be other things that come from my brain. But the first thing is press releases and emails. This is kind of, I think, media 101y, but from my work, I didn't realize how many people don't know about press releases or how to write press releases or where to go for them, or send them. So yeah, just press releases or just like an email out is the first place to start. And I will tell you from my perspective and the perspective of many journalists, the number of times we people roll their eyes reading press releases is hilarious because people try to make their thing sound like the best thing ever, uh, which is not the point. The point is to make your thing sound like your thing, right? So I always joke like it's always like three adjectives, right? It'll be like, come join us for the most exciting, dynamic, uh, you know, life-changing event, and it'll be like a bake sale. It's like, okay, pump the brakes a little bit, but try to find the most try to find what you think are the like most interesting things about your whatever it is you're doing, whatever it is you're trying to communicate, and really put those at the forefront. And maybe it's worth, and this is something else that it's linked to another point down there, maybe it's worth actually checking with someone else that isn't you, or checking with someone else who is completely removed from whatever it is you're trying to share, and just have a conversation with them about it and then see what they find most interesting, right? Because sometimes we're too close to a thing. And I have this issue myself because I'm a bit of a nerd about certain things. And so I'm trying to pitch stories and I'm talking to people about urban planning and land use bylaws, and their eyes are glazing over in the meeting and no one wants to do that story now. But I'll have a conversation with one of my colleagues and I'll say something and they're like, oh, that's really interesting. Like that's the part you should lead with. So that can be super helpful. The tip that I was given was, think about it like you're trying to write a letter to like a family member or a grandparent about it. Like if you were really trying to sell them on like what's going on, like what are the things that are interesting. And yeah, I see someone's written in there. They started a list of local media in Southwest Alberta, and that's really good. Like I give out my card very willingly, and a lot of journalists do, because you never know when a story is going to come from, where a story is going to come from. But even if you don't have personal, direct contacts for journalists or people working in media, usually every organization has like a news tips story coming in page, that kind of thing. So, and then you can find those fairly easily if you know of a media organization that you would like your stuff to go to. Send like look it up, and you will find like either news tips or whatever. Just poke around their page and you'll be able to find it. The next thing is be available. So something that I've encountered a few times, which is really funny, is someone will send out a press release, let's say on Monday, and if it's not for like sometimes people hold press conferences or it's for a specific event or whatever. But if it's not, and it's just generally like, okay, this is a thing that's happening, and if you'd like to talk to me about it, call me. And then you call, and it's like, oh, I'm not available for the next 2 days. Media works very fast. I I always say, like, media is a creative field, but as a journalist, you're more of an artisan than an artist. So people are trying to, like, and the news cycle can be incredibly quick. Like people are going out to do stories, and your interview is at 12 and you're trying to run something at 4, right? Like there's incredibly quick turnarounds that happen. So if you're putting out information saying, hey, come talk to me, you have to be there and ready to talk like right away. On the flip side, if your story, especially if your story is something that maybe isn't pegged to a time, also be prepared for it to go really slow. So I've done stories and sent them to, because I'm connected to Calgary, send them to Calgary, and I do the story on Tuesday, think it's going to run Wednesday, and then it might not run until the next week, Friday. And that's just the nature of news, right? Something big might happen. So, for example, I had a bunch of stuff that didn't run in Calgary because the water stuff happened, and that took over the news cycle, right? And so then that becomes boom, everything else gets shoved out of the way. Um, Also, you might be a small part of a big story, and that is okay. I will say this because I always feel bad sometimes when I do a 20-minute interview with someone and use um like 30 seconds of it, right? But anything how I always think of it is anytime I talk to someone, all of that stuff informs what the story is, even if it doesn't make it in, and it informs future stories. So I may talk to someone for 20 minutes. They're not really, there's 30 seconds that go in, but that other like 19 minutes and 30 seconds could be important for a story that I do in 2 weeks, in a month, in 6 months. Like I've had conversations with people about um like in November, and then I finally was able to do the story in May with the same people that I had the conversation with. But it's just it might take a while. You might be a small part of a bigger story. And that's okay. There's so many factors that go into it, even often beyond the control of the person doing the story, right? Because we have producers, we have editors. And like, for example, I work in Lethbridge, but my news, like anything I do, goes via like the Calgary channels. So as much as I love Lethbridge, unfortunately, we kind of get bumped down, right? So those are all the little things, right? Where there's stuff at play that can affect how your story appears. What you think is most important might not be what the journalist thinks is. And this is just like, you might be super, super stoked about like a part of whatever it is you're trying to get out, right? You might be super stoked. Let's say you're doing a story and you're really stoked about you're putting stuff out there, you're really stoked about work that you're creating in a very interesting medium, right? Like you're like, oh, I'm making all this stuff about making all this stuff out of garbage or whatever, like something like that, right? And that's the thing that you think is the crux of it. The journalist might find it more interesting that that your exhibition is happening in a space that has recently been reclaimed, right? Like that might be the thing that they find most interesting. And as you have to have a bit of detachment, but also still be firm. I think it's important to be firm, right? If you're being led down a path where you're not comfortable with, like you can always say no. That's also another thing. Like if someone asks you a question, you can always say no. You can always say I don't know. You can always just like say I don't want to answer that, or like can you repeat the question? Like it's a conversation, and you are allowed to like you know to clarify. You're allowed to kind of also set what you think is important, but it is that push and pull, right? And get your name in the news cycle, like get your name in there. So even if you are that 30 seconds, now like there's people that end up getting that will end up getting come back to a bunch of different times, because now you're in there. So when People are looking up a story maybe about like a specific place or a specific thing, like you come up because you were a part of this story, and so now you're in there and people can find you and say, okay, like we know this person did this, especially if maybe it's like something that was on TV or it was on radio, and they're like, oh, we know that person's a good talker. Like that's always a big thing. um but once you're in there, you can, it's really easy for that to actually snowball into so many different things. Don't ignore small or local media. I don't know if we have as much of of that issue here in Lethbridge, but even out to like smaller town newspapers or newsletters, that kind of thing, journalists check that. Like journalists check that all the time for story ideas, and so you might be looking at the paper in Fort Macleod or like a newsletter coming out of Tabor, or even just community groups that people post in. Like those places are where people look for stories, and so don't ignore those kind of looking for a bigger, like the big fish. Like it kind of snowballs. It's like the thing I said about like, CTV Lethbridge did something on us, and then from CTV Lethbridge, CBC heard about it, and we did the radio, and then after that, even someone from the web, because it's different teams, wrote an article. So these are all kind of the things. And then something else I'll add as well is like, try as much as possible to be yourself. I'm a talker. I have been for a long time. I wish I wasn't. Sometimes I want to shut up. But I think often, I'll be talking to people before we put the mic on, and the conversation's snappy. It's going, it's going, it's going. And then the minute you turn on a microphone or you turn on a camera, everyone's, well, I'm incredibly delighted to. And it's like, something in me just has a little bit, because it's just like, it's a conversation. So try to be as much yourself as possible. Try, it's hard, and this is the thing that a lot of people go to school for. Try to speak in your own voice, um, and really show yourself. If you're excited about something on camera, be excited. Um, and and yeah, just try as much as possible to make it natural. I hope some of this stuff has been helpful, but also, I guess, like Steve said, there's times for questions. So if people have questions, please ask away so that I can get you, point you in the right direction if you need something specific.
Okay, so you're ready for questions, I'll say?
Yeah, yeah, I am.
Okay, so folks. So yeah, if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat, either the chat or the Q&A, either one of those sections there, and we'll get going with those. I guess I can get kind of the ball rolling with that. Turn on my camera again here. Um, so we talked about press releases and that a little bit. Something that I actually learned recently with the new job here with Allied Arts is white sheets. Can you just explain that a little bit to folks?
I don't know if I am using different terminology, but I might need you to explain that to me a little bit.
Okay, yeah, so the basically just a sheet that can be given to like if you're having a lot of media, say, come in and talk to you for, say, a media scrum, just having all that information sort of collated in there to as like a take home for the person, so you can kind of get your point across. Say
Yeah.
you're hosting an event and you're trying to get people involved, and just so your message is clarified, kind of.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we get those a lot, like usually the city, for example, or if there's a big event. And it's super helpful because you have to think from your end, you're trying to make that media person's job as easy as possible. Like I said, the schedules and deadlines are so quick. Um, and so yeah, having your information handy, not just in a press release, but if you can give that to someone, sometimes when they do press conferences, people will send out afterward like a summary, right? So if whatever has been said, you send that out again, so then it's easy for people to reference and to get that. It makes their lives easier, and it's also beyond like the actual logistics. I think a lot of stuff is also a feeling thing, right? If you're at work and you go somewhere and you're like, huh, this person made my life much easier. Now when some, like if I see a pitch from that person again, if I see something from that, I might be more inclined just because I know there's a level of like ease that will come with that.
Awesome. Um, I guess we have one question here. Uh, a pretty good one. How do we get in touch with you, Jose?
Oh yes. So best way is via email. My email is ose.irete@cbc.ca. So just first name dot last name at cbc.ca. I will say I might not respond, and that is not personal. I get a lot of emails. Like I get so many emails. Sometimes I have nightmares about emails, and that's not even a joke. So, and that's another thing in general as well. Even with press releases, like it could go out and it feels like it just echoes. But that's just kind of the nature of things. Is there's so many. But yeah, people want to get in touch with me about stories, about anything like that, osed.irete@cbc.ca.
Awesome. We have a question from Colleen. How do you see the media growing in the future in Lethbridge?
That's a good question. It's interesting. I think we have the big thing I've noticed in general is a lot more independent media everywhere, and so I see that kind of growing a bit to a point that's a bit more consolidated. So instead of like you have your kind of like small media organizations and stuff, but I could see um people who are quite passionate banding together to just do things that are very specific and hyper local. Maybe I don't know if maybe that's what I see or what I would want to see, because I'm a big fan of stuff that's very like very much about telling a story of a place. But I could see quite a bit of that happening. Unfortunately, with mainstream media and cuts, like anytime I talk to people who've been journalists for 30 years, 40 years, they talk about how much less media there is, how many less bodies are available, like how many less people there are to cover stories. And so sadly, I think that might also be a trend that continues on the mainstream media side is like just less resources. But I also see because there's always an appetite for local, there's always an appetite for people to learn about the places they're from. And so hopefully we see some independent media, smaller media organizations I could see stepping up to fill that void.
Awesome. One question, it kind of seems to be a theme with a lot of these artwork sessions. And how do you see the implications of AI affecting kind of what you do? Or do you see any sort of worry with that?
Um, yeah, it's interesting. Like I funny enough am like I'm simultaneously like scared of AI, but not even in like a practical way, just in like a horror movie way, and also don't think about it super often. So I have to dig a little. But maybe the idealist in me feels like there's a level of I think how I explain my job, especially working for the CBC, is like I think my job is explaining like my little piece of Canada to Canadians. So, and I think this is also actually tied to the question about how I see media changing, is because I think what people really need right now is explanation and context. So we can you can find what is happening very easily. Like you can just look it up if you have a Twitter feed, Instagram, whatever, you can find just like this event happened, this thing is happening. But what's really missing and important is that like why is it happening? What is the context for it? So the idealist in me sees there's a part of me that sees like AI not necessarily playing a role in that, because like I think that's something that requires just people. But I also see like a lot of streamlining probably happening with those like And it's going to happen from, because if you look up any newspaper, any news website, you're probably going to just see a lot of stories that are 100 words. This thing happened, this is this is that, boom. And I could see AI being quite involved in that. I know there's like research tools that AI is probably useful for, in terms of, I'm losing my train of thought. But there's like different applications. Like I've in the past done like experimental stuff for like video with AI, but that's also another thing with like making tech easier. So in terms of like cutting video and like cutting, like editing photos, like using it that way as well. But I also work for an organization that's incredibly slow to adopt change. Like regional channels at the CBC we just got YouTube this year. Like like we use I love showing people the software I use. It's like it's literally older than me. So I don't know, if I think maybe from my vantage point, it'll be a while before I see AI up close in the industry.
Awesome. We have a good one here from Sterling. Speaking of context, what do you think of short form, i.e., TikTok style content? Because he feels the big thing missing is context, and most people don't seem to miss that.
Yeah, it's I think so um along with YouTube, like a big push for where I work is TikTok. And I think it's, while like there's a lot that goes on there that lacks that, it still is a good enough place to do that. What I find is happening or needs to happen is there's like an ongoing, I think right now, casualization of Canadian media, where um you're realizing like if you want to connect to people, you have to, one, meet them where they're at. So if people are on TikTok, you go there, but also breaking things down for them in ways that they understand. And I think that's where um, it really, like, you really have to make an effort when it comes to short form content, is um, making things funny, making things entertaining, making things engaging. Um, with anything like uh, social media, AI, at the end of the day, no matter how like I might feel about it, or kind of the implications of these things, they're tools. And so we have to figure out how to make those tools work for us, and how to make those tools, like how to use those tools to our betterment. So yeah, I think there there's a way to get like good information across on short form platforms. It is hard, and it takes also a mind switch for a lot of journalists, because people are used to working certain ways. But I'll also say, like a radio voicer, just like a radio story for radio news, is 59 seconds. Like that's what we do. And TikToks can be shorter than that, but I think we're already kind of working in a world that it runs on like seconds. So yeah, I think it's more so just like making stuff more engaging, entertaining on those platforms that you can pull people in, and building trust again with the audience as well, so that they know that what you're telling them isn't just true, but it's like well researched, well put, and from a place of care.
Awesome. Colleen, you mentioned that your personal art practice is hibernating. Do you have something simmering that might have to come to light?
I do actually. And one of so some of the there's one photo that I put in there that I don't think anyone else has ever seen, so that was kind of an exclusive. But um my my big goal is to put out a photo book. So I've been kind of, I always said I would do it 10 years out. And I'm like, oh, it's 10 years, because the first photo that I want to include in that is, or the earliest photo that I want to include in that is from 2014. So, yeah, I, fingers crossed, starting work on a photo book, and yeah, hopefully that sees the light of day in the next like year and a half.
I think we all hope that. So, is there any other questions from participants? Going once, going twice, three times? Oh, do you see a role for art in today's political climate for social change?
Yeah, my I have mixed feelings about this. So I think on the one hand, when people have asked me the question of like, what do you think the role of an artist is, I often will say to make art. And I think a lot of that is informed by my own experience because as as a black artist, there's often a like I think a lot of black artists get um social change thrust on them. So like your work is political just because you exist. Like because of who you are, your work becomes political. So there is like part of me that has that reluctance, but I also think um art has an incredible ability to inform and to shed light. So the book that I said is my favorite book is The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, and that is a sci-fi book about um, an anarchist society on the moon. But Le Guin does a really good job of like actually showing what an anarchist society might look like, and I think that is a big part of the role of art in social change is just showing possibility. Um, art is art has the power to create worlds, to show us things that we don't know can exist. And so I think that's a big part of it is that like yeah, just showing and shedding a light and being a compass for change or for possibility. Before we can do anything, we have to actually be able to imagine it. And sometimes it's actually quite difficult to imagine a thing that isn't right in front of us, and that's what art can do.
Awesome. Very well said. Uh, Beautifully stated. Said. Um, One last call for questions. Anyone? Anyone else? Okay. Well,
Can I ask a question?
oh, hold on. We got from Sterling. How do you make your photo stand out when everyone has a camera in their pocket?
Ooh, that's a question. I I think it's again back to the first thing of like knowledge of self. It's developing a style, like a personal style, and know and like getting to the point where someone's like, oh, I see that photo and I know, like, I feel like you took that. And a lot of that is just like trial and error and figuring out, like I said, like the first photo from this project I want to put together is from 2014. And that's when I first started being like, okay, I want to take pictures. And then over the course of that, I've realized like what my kind of style is. And I've worked with that and through that. Some of it as well is just a lot of photography for me is play, like mess around. I'll ridiculous taking photos. Like I'll be bent over like a pretzel trying to get like a weird angle on something. Um, a practical thing that I do is if let's say there's like when I'm at a shoot and there's a ton of other photographers, if everyone's taking a picture of something, I have to go somewhere else. So if everybody's lens is pointed one way, I have to find a different way to like show the thing that they're trying to show. Um, but yeah, like a ton of it is just play. And also before any picture is taken, it's the eye. Oh, oh, sorry, I had a weird thing happen. I was like, what happened? Before any picture is taken, it's the eye. So looking, learning, like sometimes I'll literally be walking around and I'll see something and I'll go, and if I'm not taking a picture, but I'm just like learning to see where the pictures are. And I think doing that in your everyday life, because we know what a good picture looks like. We watch movies, we see stuff, but it's just like practicing.
Well, thank you for attending. Sterling just noted, thank you for your time, both of you. Um, Thank you, Ose. Again, you're an incredibly talented, uh, just totally engaging, wonderful person. And not only do we appreciate you doing this talk for us, but thank you for doing all you do in your job, because you do an outstanding job at what you do. So we're going to bring that to a close, our artwork session here for today. It was brought up, this uh, was recorded, so we record all of these sessions, and you can actually find them on the Allied Arts Council website, which is artslethbridge.org, in the resources section. We're also on our YouTube channel, and we have all of our talks for going back years and years. So it's a plentiful resource of a bunch of different topics. We're taking a little bit of a break over the rest of the summer, so we'll be back with artwork the last Thursday in September. So please stay tuned to that, and we have some pretty interesting stuff coming up, one of which will be a talk on the dreaded, evil, dastardly AI that is on our horizon and how that involves the art world. Um, who knows? Uh, Sterling's asking, Ose, did you see Civil War? And what did you think of the role of photogs in that? Sorry, one more question. That's okay, Sterling.
Oh, no worries. Is I'm guessing Civil War is a movie because
Y- Yeah, it was
and so the answer is no because I it's like a bad habit now. I don't watch anything anymore, which is really sad. So I'm not even saying that to be pretentious. Like I struggle to watch stuff. Also, it's hard to watch stuff after working in media because I look at everything through the craft lens. So I'm hearing cuts and I'm like, could have, why did they move that shot and stuff like that. But now I will put that on my list, which is very long. But when I finally start watching stuff again, I'll watch that.
awesome. It's on my list too. So, uh, cheers. Yeah, everyone, thank you so much for participating, and hope to see you down the line. Cheers. Thanks again so much, Jose. Really appreciate it.